And I want to welcome you to Future Proofing Vancouver, Climate Talk versus Climate Action. This is the second in a series of events that VC and the Beedie School of Business have partnered on in terms of talking about the economic future of Vancouver. This is a hybrid event, so for those of you watching from home, we're really pleased to have you join us, hopefully not only from Vancouver, but from elsewhere. And for those of you in the audience, thank you for attending and showing up safely and timely. My name is George Benson, and I am the manager of economic transformation, responsible for decarbonization and the just transition with the Vancouver Economic Commission. And what that very, very long title means is that I have the very fun job of working on and thinking about how we make our economy, how we help our economy achieve our net zero targets by 2050, and how we do so in a resilient and in a just way. And I'm really, really pleased to be able to talk about that with all the colleagues that we have on the stage here today. Before we go any further, though, I want to start by acknowledging that we are all gathered here in the room in the studio here today on the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And it's hard not to say these land acknowledgements and have them feel like a cliche at this point, but I think it is still important to express the gratitude and the learnings that many of us have from these nations and the stewardship they have shown since time immemorial. But I think more importantly than that learning, as we'll discuss in this talk, it's about action. What do we do next? And I think we all know and take very seriously the responsibilities we have as a city, as a commission, and many of the roles we have to work towards reconciliation with First Nations. And as we'll talk a little bit about today, to respond to both the historical legacy of colonization and its ongoing active impacts today. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, in different contexts. So just to give you a quick flyby of the agenda, I'm going to talk at you a little bit longer here, and then we're going to go into a moderated discussion with these wonderful panelists who I'll introduce in a minute. These are fabulous folks, and we're really, really lucky to have them with us today. I'm really, really grateful for their time, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun. We are going to do a hybrid, as this whole event suggests, series of Q&As. So we will have people who are on the digital event who are going to send questions in that I'll be reading from my iPad here. But for those of you who are in the audience, we welcome you to come up to the mics when we sort of announce that and bring your questions forward for the panelists. Once we're done, about 11:15, we're going to close, and we're going to leave you with hopefully some tidbits and excitement to make you want to come to the next one of these. So this event that you're participating in is part of the Economic Transformation Lab. The Economic Transformation Lab is a program of the Vancouver Economic Commission. It's focused on economic resilience and long-term economic planning. We try to think about the major global drivers and trends that are coming 10, 15, 20 years out, and think about how those are going to land in Vancouver. You know, it's great to read a big McKinsey report or hear something the World Economic Forum says, but what does it actually mean for those of us who live, work, and play in Vancouver? And that's really what ETL tries to achieve. We're very, very proud to be partnered with SFU Beedie in a lot of this work, and particularly in this event. There's such a great wealth of knowledge at this school, and we at VC are always so privileged and proud to work with SFU in all the ways that we do. So the topic du jour today is climate talk and climate action. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this before I got up on the stage here. And when we're in this mode of conversation about climate change, I'm 30 and I've been kind of in the climate change world for probably about a decade now. And we tend to talk about these long-term objectives. Net zero by 2050, half our emissions by 2030, 100% renewable by 2030, and. But the action, the things that matter are what we do today and tomorrow and the next day. And one of the themes I hope we'll pull out in this conversation this afternoon is a balance between what our end game is, that 2050, those 2030 objectives, and what we're going to do to get there. And I think the tension we're going to find, and we've tried to assemble a fairly diverse range of mindsets on this, is the tension between all of the things that we need to do. I was on a podcast recently and someone said, what's the thing we really need to do to address climate change? And I said, that's entirely the wrong question to ask, because there is not a single thing that we don't need to change if we're addressing climate action. And I think if you are motivated, as many of us on the stage are, by questions of environmental and social justice, that is definitively and additionally true. We cannot leave any stone unturned, and nor can we leave anyone behind if we are going to address climate action successfully. And I think I would be remiss in starting this conversation by not mentioning, of course, the moment of crisis that we find ourselves in right now. We know and have heard many times in the news, Vancouver is currently an island. We are cut off from the rest of Canada in a number of very tangible, real, and sadly, in some ways, devastating ways due to the loss of life. Those challenges are not going to go away, right? This is the world we live in with less than 1.5 degrees of warming. And we're, as we know, coming out of COP26, we're still on track for more than 2 degrees of warming. What we are living right now is, we may sadly say, the best it's going to be for a long time. And that's the world we live in. That's the world we have to take action within. And the fear that I have, and I think many others have, is that if we keep talking about 2050 and pretending that we can act 2049 and hand in our paper at 11:59 at night, we're going to be in a situation where we don't have the resources to fully respond to that challenge, and we're going to have left many, many people behind along the way. But we're not in 2050, we're not in 2030, we're in 2021. And we have plenty of time to achieve, in a photo finish kind of way, the things that we need to set out and do. And I think the folks on the stage here are going to lead us through that conversation in a really interesting and exciting way. I'm going to stop talking at you now, and I'm going to bring up our panelists here, who we're very privileged to have from across the city, from a number of different disciplines and professions, really, really smart and exciting people who are going to, I think, really offer some interesting perspectives on what talk and action look like in the coming months, days, months, years, and so on. So we have Andréanne from the SFU Resource and Environmental Management Program. We have Akua from the Canada Green Building Council. We have Arman from Properate, and we have David from Greenlines Technology. These are impressive people, folks. These are people who have been in the trenches, they fought the battles, they know their stuff, and they are going to walk us through in a number of different ways some of these tensions between talk and action. They're going to keep coming back to this. What we're going to do is we're going to ask each of them to give a few minutes of opening remarks, just kind of cue us up. I've actually gone a little bit fast here, so I'm going to give some of that time to them, so they've got a little bit more, and put a little bit of that into the Q&A as well. But each of them are going to give a flavor of how we are talking and thinking about climate action, particularly in the Vancouver context that we all live in, and then I've squeezed them a little bit and asked them to give a bit of a call to action. What would be that action they'd want to see us take in the near term that's going to get us where we need to be going, or get us on the right track at least. After their initial comments, we're just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. I have moderator privilege, and I'm going to use it. I'm going to ask them a few questions just to tie together some of what they've said, and then we're going to open it to the Q&A. And as I said before, we're going to go hybrid here, so we'll have Q&A coming in from the Zoom link that we have, and then we'll also invite you to come up to the mics as well. I think it's going to be fun. So up first, we have Andréanne from SFU. Please kick us off.
Great, thank you. So George has asked me to talk about what this means at the city level, so in particular thinking about what is the role of the city of Vancouver in climate action. But before that, I'm going to pick up on one thing that you said. So as a professor, hearing that don't hand your paper in at 11:59 p.m., think about doing it before. And I think I just wanted to take a minute to think about that too. So it's true, it's a due date. It doesn't mean you have to hand it in at that time. It's actually, that's like the last case scenario of when you should hand something in. But I also think if I'm thinking about this from like a grad studies perspective, I wouldn't want a student to hand something at the very end. We're actually going to be looking at multiple drafts, multiple iterations. We're going to try again. We're going to stand back, reflect, revise, and then try again. And each time we're going to try to make our message stronger. We're going to try to make our evidence stronger, and we're going to try to make sure that we can communicate what we're trying to communicate the best way possible. And I think when we're talking about this difference between talk and action, or what does action look like, I think there needs to be more emphasis on that idea of try, reflect, revise, and try. So, this might be in terms of thinking about, urban experimentation or governance by experimentation, but really thinking about the fact that as George said, we have to do something, and we actually have to do something everywhere. Like there's not sort of a stone that we have to leave untouched. And yet there's a lot of fear when it comes to climate change, especially recently with the heat dome, the heat waves, the forest fires, and now the floods. A lot of people are feeling a lot of despair. And the conversation that we are often having right now is, wow, things are really bad. But hopefully we can kind of change that and go, okay, for some folks, this is the first time that they've really felt that despair. So what can we do about it? Again, we need to act, but again, I think we need to emphasize the fact that there is no one solution. And it just because one thing didn't quite work as much as we'd hoped, doesn't mean we can't keep going. So I really want to emphasize that idea of get out there and try. Learn from those trials though. Do not sort of go, this didn't work, move on. Take a minute, pause and go, what can we learn from this particular intervention, project, program, policy, and how might we move forward through that? I think the failure of the City of Vancouver's climate emergency parking program could be such an event where we might go, okay, the city put forward an idea of how they could fund climate action here in the City of Vancouver, and they put forth a way to do that, which is within their means, within their jurisdiction. So they have the power to control land. Cities are responsible for land use, and parking is a form of land use. The land that most people park their cars on is actually public land. So the idea was to think about, is there a way that we can both manage our land differently while also raise some funds to support our climate action? The specific proposal that was put forward did not pass. I really hope that the city doesn't just go, okay, so parking isn't going to work, but that we can go, what was it about what we put forward or how we put it forward that didn't resonate, that didn't get the action that we wanted? I think a big part of that is around engagement and understanding what's happening. When the City of Vancouver was beginning their engagement before they actually wrote the Climate Emergency Action Plan, one of the things they found was that most people did not know that the majority of our emissions in the city come from transport and building. In fact, 37% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from vehicles, and that's anywhere from a private motor vehicle to freight, and 57% come from buildings, and that's things like heating the buildings and water. And yet most people thought the problem was around waste and the fact that we weren't using our resources very well, but that's actually less than 5% of our impact. So I think there's a lot that we can do in terms of engaging with people and bringing people along in the action we need, and for them to sort of better understand, but also for us to have more of these conversations. Yes, there is a bit of talk in there, but talk in a way that's actually going to support more action. And I think that's really important. I think another thing that's really important when we're thinking about that action and what can we do at the city level and what's actually happening with the city's climate emergency action plan. So recently, we just passed the 1-year mark, and the city presented their annual report. And I was asked if I thought the city was in fact going to be able to achieve its goals by 2030. And rather than kind of say yes or no or be sort of a gloomy response, for me, one of the things I think is really important is to recognize that the city actually can't do this alone. So again, George was kind of asking me to think about what is the city doing, how is the plan going, but also that idea of action. And I think what's really interesting about the Vancouver Economic Commission and wanting to bring together sort of the business sector along this is the plan recognizes that the city needs to work with other sectors, other governments, levels of government, other jurisdictions, within the region. But this idea that I think it can't just be about like, oh, we need these people on board, but it's like, how can we actually bring different sectors on board? How can the building industry, the transport industry, how can individual companies participate in this? And there's often a tension where we're talking about the action we need in terms of what can I do as a person versus the larger societal change that we really need to see. So it's not about you bringing your reusable water bottle to an event, but sort of much bigger changes that we can see. So again, if we know that the majority of our emissions are coming from transport and buildings, what role do those sectors play and the subsectors that support those industries play? How can we reimagine what's happening, and how can those industries work with the city? I know, so my background is in planning, and I'm a professor, and I work in climate change. So the norm would be that I would just be completely against the private sector, that I would just be like, you guys are the worst. You're the reason why we're in this problem. And yet, in my research, what I have found is that some of the most innovative sustainable housing developments, some of the most sort of inclusive neighborhoods are actually spearheaded by architects and developers from the private sector. So I think there's an opportunity to showcase the kind of work that is happening, the kind of work that can be happening, and really encourage more people to act in the way that they can within, again, their sphere. I think another thing that's really important to think about is that idea, again, of not waiting to 2030 or 2050, but if we know we want to reduce our emissions, if we know we want to increase our amount of renewable energy, let's do that now so that, again, by 2030, we're already there. And again, we've seen this from the building industry in BC in terms of being able to meet targets before they're actually put in place by the province and by the city. And I'd like to see a lot more of that and a lot more support. I know it's not always easy to work with planners. I know it's not always easy to work with the city in terms of actually trying to get things to change. But the way that governments often work is they like to be able to point to something that worked. So I would really encourage everyone to sort of to keep going. Again, and just because you put a proposal forward that didn't pass, like take a minute, pause, reflect, learn, revise, and try again. And my hope would be that enough people can do that, where eventually these kinds of projects become the norm, and it actually helps the city achieve its own targets towards 2030.
Perfect. Some really interesting themes in there. And this is something that I think speaks so deeply to the core of what VC believes, our mission, as you put so eloquently. I think it's about leveraging the talents of different institutions, of different actors, of different types of organizations to attack the problem from multiple angles. And that's, I think, an underpinning of some of what ETL does as a program. But it's baked into our philosophy, going all the way back to our original participation in the Green City Action Plan. So I feel like you've done a little bit of free advertising for us, but absolutely agree. And this question of iteration, I think, is really interesting too. And I think it in many ways might set up our next speaker here, Akua from the Canada Green Building Council. Akua, I'm thinking of the LEED standard and the multiple iterations it's gone through over the years. Of course, CGBC doesn't only do that anymore, but I think you folks have pushed so many groundbreaking approaches and frameworks and ideas over the years with exactly that spirit, I think, of testing and iterating and trying things and not waiting for, in many cases, governments to even act. So I'm sure there's a lot for you to chew on there, but I'm going to turn it over to you now to give us a flavor of how the sectors and the stakeholders you work with are approaching this.
Great, thank you. Nice to be here. And so maybe just to build off of what Andréanne was talking about, when you're thinking about the scope of what buildings are responsible for in British Columbia, and actually in multiple cities across the country, you're looking at around 50% of the emissions being associated with buildings and homes. And so our organization works a lot with owners, and I wanted to focus maybe just to share with you a little bit more insights into how large owners, so this can be both institutional and commercial owners, are starting to approach the issue of decarbonizing their own building stock. And why this is important is that actually in Canada, one of the interesting things, unlike other countries, is the properties are actually consolidated. Those large buildings like the one we're in now, as well as all downtown, tend to be consolidated in actually fewer hands. So there are fewer building owners that own about 80% of the buildings across Canada. So by getting those portfolio owners on board, you can actually make significant dents in the emission reductions in buildings. And what we've seen really, actually, if I just cascade back in the last 2 years, is pretty radical changes in terms of the prioritization of climate action at the portfolio level. So many of these larger building owners are now not only seeing this as a climate imperative, but a risk to their business. If you can, they have been informed by some policy and regulatory changes in British Columbia, like the Energy Step Code, which has kind of set out a pretty consistent path about what buildings are supposed to perform like into the future, as well as the Clean BC plan, which also signals the importance of emission reductions. But on top of that, anybody who is lending to buildings, the pressure is now on to disclose how you're doing and how you're dealing with emission reductions. So ESG has been like catapulted from some sort of a nice to have on the governance side of building owners to something that's an essential piece. Similarly, I think what we're also seeing across this this area is whereas just even 5 years ago, it used to be maybe more a sustainability manager or coordinator. If you look on Indeed now, they're hiring for VPs and director levels. So increasingly, those positions are moving up to the C-suite level to both impact not just the nice to have sustainability workplace programs for tenants, but significant emissions in their own operations. So when you look at on the ground, what they're trying to do is building owners are having to see how do they decarbonize their assets and look at it through that lens. The majority of the actions that they can take are related to their existing buildings. So how do I renovate the buildings that I have today to be better performing? And any new construction, how do I do so in a way that is near net zero emissions? So you're seeing decarbonization strategies coming into play, looking at that portfolio of assets. And so, leaders like Quadreal, which owns, I think like $32 billion in real estate assets, and Concert Properties are some of the ones that are leading the charge to put in place not only these decarbonization strategies, but annual reporting to measure how they're doing against those targets. When you're looking at the kind of interventions, like what you're going to see around you and what you're starting to see around you when it comes to renovations, we're looking at primarily in British Columbia electrification. So you're moving buildings off of relying entirely on natural gas to being able to electrify. Now, this means they have to also deal with demand, because if you can imagine, if we're going to all have electric cars and electric buildings, there's an increase in demand. So thinking about how you use the most energy efficient systems, and in many cases this might be heat pumps, to heat and cool buildings and spaces. And increasingly too, we're also seeing folks look at on-site renewables. So even building integrated photovoltaics, so the sides of your buildings to be able to kind of absorb and store energy, as well as rooftops to generate renewables. So those are when we walk around our downtowns and starting to see that scaffolding approach occur around us. These are the types of things you can be inquiring about and pushing on the various spaces that you might work or go to school, to really understand what are the energy efficiency and carbon interventions that they're undertaking. One thing that was mentioned at the intro was obviously the crisis we're in today. So I think we are seeing this increasing demand and expectation that'll continue to escalate through to 2030. But that means a reliance on a pretty stable supply chain. And we are not in a position currently where we have a stable supply chain. That's been disrupted by COVID. So on the small scale, people who are trying to do renovations and put in energy efficient, high performance windows are often waiting, 6 to 8 months or so to get those products in. So some of these supply chain issues are going to constrain and challenge us in the near future, and also cause us to think differently about how we strengthen that, because we're going to be reliant on a lot more of these technologies That supply chain side of things also lends itself to the labor too. To actually do the renovations and new construction here in British Columbia, we're going to have to triple the construction and development design workforce by 2030 to deliver on that. So on the good side, there's a lot of great new jobs and enhanced work that's coming in for people that can work in a meaningful way on these solutions. But at the same time, it is obviously for both institutions that train designers, architects, engineers, the trades, there is a big step to take to ensure that they're getting the low carbon skills that they need. So that's just a bit of a snapshot of some of the things that are occurring both in BC and the trends that are pushing the building sector forward. Yeah.
Is your head spinning yet? One thing you said, Akua, that I think is so apt, and I'm going to make this about VC because this is partially our event, but this question of or this push and pull, right, between corporate leaders who are willing to jump forward and take a stronger stance to go far beyond what in some cases, far beyond what financial regulations or other regulations might call for in terms of ESG or climate risk disclosure, et cetera, et cetera. Folks may not know, but I highly recommend you look into it. Something that's really alive in many of our worlds these days is something called the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD. TCFD has gotten lots of thumbs up globally. The central bankers like it. The various international financiers like it. And speaking as a decade as a climate activist, I like it, and a lot of my colleagues do as well. The idea being that until, and this goes to Akua's point about sustainability being brought up into the C-suite, until sustainability, climate action, justice, if you like, are fundamentally embedded in these organizations, public and private, we will not achieve these objectives. And this push and pull between the private sector and government is really powerful, because if those leaders are showing how it can be done, and talk about construction, Quadrille is a great example of a developer. We could mention Chandos as a builder that are doing that work every day. They're vastly ahead of so many of the public and private organizations out there. If we can leverage their leadership and build that into a baseline, then we can bring everybody along, and we can use the sort of iteration of companies to do a lot of to do some really powerful work. So I love those comments, Akua, and I think the supply chain piece is also so critical. The Broadbent Institute this year released a great report on green industrial policy. The idea being that, and I think Akua said it so well in terms of workforce, like, we are going to change everything. We're going to retrofit every single building. We're going to change all of our infrastructure. We're going to do everything and then some. That's going to take a lot of workers. It's going to take a lot of technology. It's going to take new companies. It's going to take a lot of finance. And we need policies and frameworks that are going to guide all of that at a really, really high level. So I'm going to stop my pontificating and just say that I love those comments, and I'm excited to dig into them. And what we're going to do next is I'm going to turn to Arman here, who is the CEO of Properate. And Arman is a brilliant guy, and I think was recently honored as one of the CAGBC's emerging leaders in 2021. Is that right? But Arman works at a somewhat different scale than some of the other folks here, working with individual builders and folks at the property, at the site level. And so I think he can give us a flavor of some of the granularity of these problems, whether that's supply chains or workforce or what have you. So Arman, I'm going to turn it over to you now to tell us a little bit about what you're up to and what you're seeing.
Yeah, thanks for flattering me, George. And I think Akua said all of the right points about the industry as the in the larger scale. My background was in educationally, I was in urban planning, but then I kind of ended up being an entrepreneur for specifically the low-rise green buildings, which are individually small buildings, but collectively they are very big part of our emission problems, and also all of the problems that they have. And when you look at this subject of interest, affordability, equity, and resilience added to that, these are not separate subjects, but they are all of the things that we have to do to build the buildings in the right way. So there is one right way of building buildings, and there are many wrong ways. And when we look at that right way, all of these things come together. It's still these are, of course, work in progress. I mean, resilience is up there, but I don't think anyone would have, imagined the things that happened, around the around our province, all the floods, everything, roads to Vancouver being cut off. Actually, if anyone is watching this from the rest of Canada, we miss you already. But like it is to say that and you see how the media tone even changed. Like everyone was making fun of Pineapple Express and the more rain is coming, paint me surprised. And then like there was this subject of loss of life, the devastations it really caused, and ironically like fresh water being a problem in the flooding. And we all see that these are all. This is to say that all of these subjects are still work in progress. We are learning like everybody else, and also nature is kind of forcing our hand in all of this. So I think it's really timely to have this conversation of the future, but also like when we are looking at the future, what sort of planning is important. So planning can be sometimes be seen as kicking the can down the road. But in some ways, it can actually be done right, and it can be very actionable for today. For example, VEC published this study of the future of construction. How like more high performance materials are going to catch the market. So this was like this conversation of triple glazed windows are the future. At some point, they're just going to be the norm inside the industry, and we were seeing that in Europe as well. It's that like double glazed windows are somewhat of a specific ask, and they might even cost more than triple glaze, which everyone does in some places. So even though that was like kind of projecting and planning, we could take that information and take it to window manufacturers and tell them, look, like this is going to happen. Do you want to be ahead of your other competitors, and you want to be like repurposing all of your manufacturing lines to build triple glaze from today? Or do you want to be like behind everybody else and be kind of forced into that? So that sort of planning really brings in, I think, future ideas to today, and it's very, very valuable about things that have to be done today. But what I want to like really highlight here is that I think we have to start doing things right today, because that idea that like maybe we will have some technological leapfrog or some really futuristic, quantum technology that's going to come in and it's going to fix all the problems, is a very, very big leap of logic and leap of faith that may actually cause a lot of problems for us and really not let us reach those targets we are setting out for ourselves. If you, especially in amenities and community buildings and housing and buildings in general, we have a limited number of construction workforce. Like Akua mentioned that this is going to grow over time, hopefully, but it's like we also have to do things from today, because this limited number of people, like it takes a carpenter to be trained and recruited and put inside the industry a very long time. And there is just a set number of these people. We are looking at a significant acceleration in the construction in this year. And when you look at the numbers, registrations in BC housing for multi-units is 35,000. Think about it, it's not a really big number. So it's like this industry needs to really do things right as they are going around and making new homes and fixing those old homes. We have to do this right today so that we have a chance that over so many years, there was a small percentage we can do every year is going to accumulate and hopefully reach the 100%. But if you think about it as, okay, like we are doing what we can today and let's like come back and do things right maybe next time, we really cannot get there. We really cannot scale as fast. So I think the things that we can do today is to first of all, like let's just do things right from the beginning. Densification can be one of the important things that can work well for multiple things within our community. Not only it's going to increase resilience and also like take the pressure off from some of the affordability issues, it's going to be good for transportation. It is going to also allow us to just use more of what we have, and that is like workforce and also our resources. And one other thing that I think is very important, and it's probably because I'm in the business side of things and I see that a lot, is that we need to incorporate more openness and more transparency in the way that we are bringing everything forward. we have engaged with so many projects across the province, so many homes, so many, we have seen so many different building technologies. If you stop me somewhere and you ask me how much a heat pump costs, I cannot tell you that. Like, it's just something that we don't really see having a price tag. And whenever you want to buy something, the first thing you are looking for is a price tag. It's like, how much this is going to cost me. But it's like, not only those prices are not really being transparently put out by different manufacturers, but it's also there's like so many unknowns inside each project that just makes things harder. So when we look at other industries, we see that a lot of private capital, a lot of private interest, and also generally like a lot of excitement and buzz is around defining things for the future of those industries. For example, we have self-driving cars, we have autonomous vehicles as a whole. That's like taking a lot of attention, a lot of interest from in the transportation. But when you like look at buildings, it's like, okay, what is exciting? What is like that one thing that news articles get written about, and people, at the bars, they talk about how cool it's gonna be, and maybe the first thing that people go towards is smart homes. And when you think about it, it's like, okay, I see this home that's leaky. It has a lot of draft. It doesn't really keep the heat inside. It's run by rodents all around. And I rip out the old thermostat and I put in a Nest, and it's just all okay. It's not really how it's like that. We have to like be more excited about better buildings. We have to be more excited about like better communities, see that intrinsic value in there, and really make bring in that private interest, that public interest into all of this. And maybe one of those facets, again, can tie back into that openness, into not only like putting all of the good things forward, but also all of the challenges, all of the weaknesses, and really look for those fresh, bright minds to come in and solve all of those for us. So that's where I'm going to leave it, but I'm looking forward to a good conversation.
No, all of you are very dense speakers, so there's always lots of lots of pieces to pick out there. I mean, I felt you picking up on both picking up on and expressing attention around this idea of iteration. Like, we have to do it. We have to do it now. We also have to do it as right as we possibly can, and we have to be worried about, either the vulnerabilities or the challenges we may build into some of our we may build in today for ourselves in the future if we go the wrong direction. I mean, one quick example, as you well know, is this conversation around embodied carbon in buildings. If we are going to build to the highest possible standard of energy efficiency and zero carbon, we may end up using certain materials today which are going to increase our long-term embodied carbon. And so we're trying to prevent carbon in the long term, but we're going to use a lot of carbon rather in the short term to get there. And that the math of that can be very challenging. So we have we have to be very conscious of that. But as Arman says, we have to act. So it's going to be, the phrase I often use is we're going to be building the ship while we sail it, which will be fun and interesting for all of us. Last but certainly not least, we have David from Greenlines Technology. David has been a collaborator VEC over the past few months, working on a paper which we're just about to release. Very excited. And David has a number of pieces of experience here that are really exciting, but has spent a lot of time thinking about carbon markets. And I think for a lot of people, these are very abstract ideas. What is a carbon market? How does it function? I'm not going to ask David to give us the 101. You'll have to wait for the paper to come out. But in short, I think a lot of David's expertise and interests here are really around filling these gaps. We're iterating, we're building towards things. We are going to leave pieces behind, or we're going to need help to get there. And carbon markets and some of the various aspects of them might help us fill particular pieces of that. And I think as well, something we haven't necessarily picked up as much on here is how do individuals participate? And I know we've all said, like, this isn't something we can each solve with our reusable water bottle or bag, but there are ways for people to accelerate and to push forward these big systemic changes, and carbon markets might be part of that. So David, I'm going to turn it over to you, and hopefully I haven't stolen too much of your comments.
Thanks, George. So yeah, thank you for having me. So I would ask, we have only some people here in the audience live, but who knows carbon markets? Who has direct experience? Who has had a conversation in the last few months about carbon? It probably is like very few, right? A few hands? Okay. Yeah, some, so. Okay, perfect. The point I'm trying to make here is that carbon markets are a thing. exist, are growing exponentially. They're becoming more and more important every day. But unfortunately, most people in real daily lives, they have no idea. I asked my mom still has no idea what I'm doing. But the point I'm trying to make is the markets have now a place in the world. In the Paris Agreement, the COP26 has established that those markets to help the environment reach our goals, basically help our economies to reach our goals. And the challenge that we have is that carbon markets have become a thing that has transformed our economies. Right now, our economies, I would challenge anybody to say that we live in a carbon economy world. Whether you like it or not, carbon is an asset or it's a liability for you. If you are the city of Vancouver, you need to think about, is this an asset or a liability? If you are a business, if you're a current corporation, if you're a person, is this a liability? Is it going to be an issue in the long run for me? Or is it going to be an asset? Just like you own a building or you own a car or you own something else, your house, you have to think about that. And carbon markets allows you to take that liability and transform that into an asset if you reduce it, if you make efforts to reduce that. And I think that's the opportunity for everyone here. So the challenge 5 years ago when I started into the carbon markets, I realized is, going back to the transparency, there's no transparency in carbon markets. It's the most opaque business I've seen in my life. And unfortunately, that's something that we need to change. So to me, the effort we need to all make is transparently communicate the information. What is the pricing? What are the issues? What are the challenges? The pitfalls of the carbon markets. If anybody hears about offsetting, it's always about bad news that somebody's doing something shady. That's true in many, many cases, but the reality is that we can transform that into an opportunity for the city of Vancouver, in the metro area, and for our province to actually become the leaders. 10 years ago, when the BC government launched the BC Offset program, that was a revolutionary idea in the world. We became leaders. That was 10 years ago. From that point, things have not evolved much on that program, and now they're working to expand and improve that. But the idea is that many governments have now evolved and moved on from that concept of forestry offsets and forestry carbon markets. Now they're looking into new opportunities with people, and that's where going back to George's comment about people, how can we engage people? We need to get people to participate in carbon markets, and the reason why, especially in Canada, every Canadian produces 16 tons of carbon emissions every year. We are the highest in the world, except a few countries in the Gulf in the Middle East. Doha, I think it's 20-something tons. But I come from Spain. Spanish people, as an average, produce 4 tons a year. That's 25% of Canadians. How did that happen? How did we get so bad? I mean, we need to do something to change that. And to me, the best way that I know about changing behavior is money. Whether we like it or not, most people react to financial incentives. Also penalties, of course, that's another way of helping people move. But I think rewarding people for good behavior is something that I worked in the last 5 years on, developing the systems and the tools for allowing people that make good decisions, whether you move, whether you buy a house that's low carbon, that whether you buy vegan, you eat vegan, or you buy an electric car, whether your choices are, then we need to give you the tools to actually benefit financially from those choices. Right now, there's very little talk about that. There's a lot of nature-based solutions, like incentivizing forestry, mangroves, and blue carbon, they call it. Those are excellent things, but we need to address the people. Give everybody around the table a tool, a choice to benefit from that. So that, to me, that's one of the biggest challenges, that there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of lack of information, a lot of opaque information out there that prevents people around the table, whether it's corporations, whether it's governments or people on the street, that can actually take decisions and make choices. If we're talking about buildings like before, if we're going to be promoting green buildings, wouldn't it be great if you were going to buy a house or change for a heat pump, that you actually benefit from carbon markets, that the system allows you to benefit and get a financial reward from that? Those markets exist. We just need to develop the system to allow that. Otherwise, those flows of capital are going elsewhere. Whether we like it or not, this is happening. The capital flow of money in the carbon markets is going from Canada, US, and Europe into third world countries. which is fine. But the dirty little secret that exists is that most corporations that develop those projects in third world countries actually are based in our countries. So the flow of capital comes back to us. So it really doesn't really help those countries. It really goes back to us. So that's one of my main motivations, is trying to share as much information as possible with the world, with everybody, including obviously working with VEC to develop the report. So hopefully come in a couple of weeks.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you to the entire panel for, as I say, offering a thicket, I think, of information that we're going to start to parse through here. There's so many questions I could ask, and there's so much that has already been said. I think I just want to try to keep it high level here with a very broad question, but I think I'd be interested for each of you to give sort of an initial take on this, maybe. Everything we've described so far, and obviously this VEC is an agency of the City of Vancouver, most of us here are based in the City of Vancouver with various ties elsewhere. But it's clear that the city can't do all of this alone. And yet, I think as Andréanne was saying, there's also many levers perhaps that we haven't pulled yet. And so there's this interesting and very challenging dance of how all these jurisdictions and institutions are going to work together. Excuse me. I think the best way to put this is really, what's the hook? What's it going to be? Yeah, the hook is, I think, the best word. What's the hook that's going to be able to bring the right partners to the table together? And perhaps is that hook something that the city actually possesses? Having sat in many of these rooms over the years, multi-institutional, multi-level governance contexts, there's often a kind of who's going to chair the meeting? Who's going to be the one to actually call us together and set an agenda? But I guess the question for me is, what's the hook? What's the message that's going to get us there? Is it about risk and loss? Is it about opportunity? Is it about something else? And is that a position that the city can fulfill, or is there another actor who has to sort of pull up their big kid pants and take the first step there? So maybe I'll just open that to the panel, whoever wants to noodle on that first.
First, I would say it's a combination of both sides, both the policymakers, the City of Vancouver, BC government, so forth, and obviously federally. They need to set up the table for people to actually participate there. There are many people I know that are willing to bring their voices, and they're trying to take the leading position and trying to showcase what they're doing. But if there's no table to be set up, and that table can't be set up by the industry, it needs to be set up by policy making. Now, the industry, and I think I'm on the industry side, of course, it has many of the solutions. They're not like far-fetching ideas that needs to be developed. No, they exist. They can be implemented. So we talked about during the preps of this talk about the solutions exist. It's about putting them in practice. It's a political debate, maybe more than a technical debate. So to me, it's both, but also the component of the demand from people. If people demand solutions, if the people demand heat pumps, those solutions from the industry are going to be brought forward. And if there's barriers on the policy making, those barriers will at some point get solved. So I think we need policy making, the industry, but also the people on the street.
And so you're saying that the hook then is the politics of it, right? The hook is the city saying, I got climate strikers doing hunger strikes on my front lawn. Premier, Prime Minister, ministers, I need you to come to the table because I can't deal with this anymore. Is that the hook?
Yeah, I would say so.
Andrea, did you want to?
I guess I don't want to say like I disagree, but I'm just, but I also want to say,
come on,
but I was like, I think one of the things that we've done really well here is like highlight the good that industry can do, and I think that's really important because again, I know that in my field we can be really negative about the private sector. However, I think the industry that we're talking about are actually a minority. They still are the minority because if they were the majority, the change would have already occurred.
Yep.
One of the major reasons why the climate emergency parking plan didn't pass is because it was seen as sort of a bit of a political suicide. People did not want it to happen. So the idea was that the majority of the population, if that's 51% or if that's 70%, but that the majority of the people did not want it to pass. So it didn't pass. People did not want to pay for parking. people feel very strongly about paying for parking, very strongly about paying for parking. Parking is on public land. Public land is not your land. You should probably pay to use that land. More than 50% of the city's land is actually roads. So again, if we're thinking about what can the government do, coming back to this, they have control over how we use land, what we charge for that use. And I worry that just saying, hey, industry, tell us what the solutions are, it's like, that's not going to actually do anything, because we still have a ton of industry that says, we're happy to do the bare minimum of what you're asking for us. Look at the majority of the housing out there. It is not high quality, most sustainable housing in the world. It is what they're being asked to do. A lot of people don't fully grasp what it means to make these decisions and the impact that they're going to have in terms of their life at 2030, at 2050, and beyond. And yet, that's who gets to make decisions. And I support that because we live in a democratic country, and I think that's really important. And yet, I would like to see the decision makers, and those are, in our existing context, government, be a little bit bolder. And I think it needs to come from a bolus. I don't think it needs to come from like, what's our hook? It's like, this is our responsibility, is to take care of you. And we are not doing that. The government is currently not doing what's right for current and future generations if we're thinking about climate change. They're not. So we can bring everybody to the table, but they've actually got to do something. And I think I would like to see a little bit more.
I also trained as a planner, and we certainly are often taught to villainize business. But I think one of the interesting things that I've certainly learned in my time at the Commission is the incredible diversity of businesses that exist in this city, across the country. The economy is not a monolith, and nor are businesses. And there's a really interesting, you're right, the companies that are leaders are few and far between. And there are some sectors in our economy where there's, literally one or two. And there might be one that's really, really good, and there might be a second one that's okay. And then the vast majority of that sector is like, no, we're pretty happy with status quo. We make lots of money. We're good. We're happy with this. What we might want to remind them in a context, especially like today, is status quo is really fun until it stops being the status quo and something really bad happens. And if you've been only ready for the status quo and not for something bad happening, you might lose your shirt, right? So we can remind them of that, and that might inch us along a little bit further. But just within this theme of diversity of industry, Akua, I'd love to hear from you within CAGBC, right? You in some ways represent a leadership coalition of companies who are, in some cases, I don't know if you agree with this, so I'd love your thoughts, maybe dragging the rest of the industry along. Oh God, what are these hippies doing at they're having a conference about green buildings again? What are they up to? Maybe tell us a little bit about that dialectic between leaders and laggards, and how you see that playing out. Are more and more people signing up to be leaders, or is it just, the bar for leadership inches along day by day, year by year?
I think what we're seeing actually is a shift from just a select few. When we started 20 years ago bringing the LEED standard to Canada, it was sort of a select group of industry that got on board to champion that. We're now at the stage where we're actually more looking at the early majority. So there are increasingly folks that we've never talked to before that are coming to us and wanting to know, well, how do I do the zero carbon building standard? How can I approach that? So I have some optimism in that way, but that I think we are no longer in the space of just the select few. So we're at the cusp of the early majority. And so I would say, in all ways, we need to feed the early majority. And so that means both identifying, supporting, amplifying, prioritizing the early majority in any way that we can. One of the ways that in the last 20 years, one of the biggest differences and explosions that we've seen in the green building industry, and I would say in the last 5 years, it's doubled. So that's a positive thing, has been procurement. So you can look at that procurement in terms of what the government of British Columbia as an owner requires for their own maintenance of their existing buildings. And it can come down to also procurement about how a business decides to choose the tenant space that they want to rent. Procurement is one of the most powerful levers to signal to the industry what's going to both make business sense and environmental sense into the future. And that was the way that we saw with governments first across the country saying that I'm going to require you to meet a certain standard if you want to work on our buildings. That charged up the industry to get the right skills and expertise in place to deliver on that, and really solidified a new way of designing, renovating, and operating buildings. So you said one, and I gave you two, but you know.
Arman, you know, you're close to the ground here, right? Like you're working with individual property owners, and we're sort of moving away from my original question, but that's totally fine. You're working with these individual property owners and having conversations about how they're going to potentially, you know, either renovate their home or they're designing something new. What are pieces of this that are standing out for you in that particular context?
Yeah, I think I was kind of thinking about the hook, because this has been a journey of a few years, and if you found that, I would love to hear it. But you know, I think, well, I don't know how well this is going to fly, but I feel like when you lower the barrier of innovation and you kind of like let more ground to those mad scientists who are doing the craziest things, and you know, from some of those there comes good ideas, and there are a lot of bad ideas as well. I think our issue right now is that we just don't acknowledge bad ideas or bad implementations as a way of, you know, just reaching that end goal. Is like, you know, we figured out this is not working out. To me, sometimes it feels that, for example, when we have these plans for 2030, 2050 and whatnot, you know, we say like we're going to build a net zero ready home by 2030. This net zero ready home, you know, one analogy for it is that you can heat it up with a hairdryer. And I want you to think about the homes you have today. Like, how many hairdryers does that take? And, you know, how are we removing it? So it feels like somebody is saying, you know, just wait until 2030. It's going to be so good. We're going to make so many great buildings and all of that. And then, you know, you see some concerning signs that, for example, like stuff that were promised right now they're being pushed back. And it feels like we are not really allowing it or giving ground for just, you know, experiments to happen. We want to be thorough, we want to be good, but this idea that, you know, boy, we did that thing and it really blew up in our face is like, it's seen as a political suicide, as it was mentioned. Is like, how can we reduce that sort of that barrier? Like you see, this is happening in many other fields of science, such as biohacking, you know, transportation. You're seeing people are just like kind of trying to circumvent certain types of regulations. And I think it's kind of unsettling to think about, okay, like, well, should we like forego like some of the building code, or should we like not like allow people to just like sidestep some regulations? But like that's one extreme of it. Maybe there are things that we can do in the middle, that we can just experiment with things that we just don't know how well they are going to work, and allow people to just like make things their own way and see which one of them is going to work out. I don't want to like put this into like private versus public sector, but I feel like these two things always drive each other. So as soon as you see one source of funding or interest is coming from one side, the other one kind of responds, or, you know, maybe the opposite, like when there is like legitimate interest on one side and the other side is not really responding, then everything just goes back to that lower like basic level that it was the status quo. So I guess like just being open to more experimentation, being more open to dropping capital and resources, and, you know, just like into things and being ready to just say, you know, that just didn't work and now we learned. That I would say.
Well, I think it's worth noting that the city of Vancouver, in having its own building code, for example, is a kind of policy laboratory, not just for British Columbia, but for Canada. The BC Energy Step Code was born out of a very interesting and collaborative process between the city, between the province, between other local governments, and between industry. And now it's not perfect, but it is quite a landmark piece of regulation within BC and within the country that is driving some very impressive achievements. Not enough yet, but some impressive achievements in the built environment. And I think that's a really interesting, it's worth highlighting that we as a city can play that role. I think, and Arman, what I really heard you saying was, and forgive me if I'm summarizing too succinctly, but we need to reduce the risks for government to take a chance to iterate. You know, there was a great example that was contrasted. I think it was Solar City, and there's two companies in the United States that both got bailout money. One of them was a solar company, I think it was Solar City. It went bankrupt, and then the federal government in the United States kind of owned the failure. They were, oh, you guys wasted this taxpayer money, and this company went bust. And there was another company, which the name escapes right now, but is still to this day very, very successful. And the government got none of the credit for having made that investment. And so the risk-reward calculus as a government is, well, if I do anything, I'm probably going to get crapped on. Why bother? You know, right? Like, let's punt this to someone else. Not to say that every government does that, but you can imagine the calculus in many people's minds that way. So what I heard you saying is we need to reduce that. We, government, need to be more bold. We, the public, need to ask for more of that boldness.
100%.
And be okay with failure.
And be okay with failure. Absolutely. One of the themes that's come out, and we're coming up time here, so I'm going to ask one more question that's come through the Q&A, and then I'm going to open up the mics here. I want to talk about carrots and sticks. We have heard many, many times, basically every conversation now, and some people suggest that it is in some ways a form of new climate denialism, that only incentives work and sticks are bad and scary and people shouldn't be punished. So I'm going to ask you guys to be succinct on this one, but in a phrase, in a moment, you know, what's the balance between carrots and sticks that we should be looking to? Do we have enough sticks right now? Do we not have enough carrots? What's that, you know, I guess, give me a sense. Do we need more carrots and more sticks, or more or less of either? And give me a flavor. Let's just go across. Andre?
Really quickly, so within policy, we tend to talk about policy instruments or policy tools. You have regulation, incentives and disincentives, pilot projects, like where you showcase something the government tends to do it, and then you have like education and volunteer. The carrot and stick is very much that incentive, disincentive. Do we have enough? Which one should we do? I would say neither. I'm not interested in carrots and sticks. I'd rather focus on regulation. My short answer.
You wouldn't see sticks as regulation?
They don't, not necessarily. Because incentive doesn't mean you have to do it. It means we would like you to do it. Here's some money. We're not making you do anything. We're just saying it would be nice if you did. We'll reward you if you do. What if you just had to?
I guess in my conceptualization, I would consider that a stick.
Oh,
like,
okay.
if you don't comply with the building code, we fine the hell out of you. Right?
Yeah, but it's a different policy tool.
Fair enough.
So.
Cool. Yeah. Carrots, sticks, do we need more or less of either or both?
The sticks, I would say, like, yeah, the building code is a stick, and it's moving up faster. I would say the big thing is we need it moving up faster. So we have the step code, we have the path to the future. We need to start to see that those requirements ratcheted up more quickly. And so that way you can still have your incentives for the leaders who are going all the way to the end, but the bottom has to come up faster on that.
Arman?
I am firmly in Team Carrot. And I think it's because like I was like, the reason I started this entrepreneurship journey was like, oh, a step code is coming, and you know, if everyone has to do it, so now we will have the whole market. It's gonna be so great. But it's like, you see, whenever like sticks come in, you see a race to the bottom, is that people just want to do the bare minimum. And then like when you talk about other things, they're like, oh, you didn't tell me to do this. It's like, it's just about checking boxes. But if you build an industry based on, you know, people wanting things and people seeing value in things and things being cool and being like, you know, electric car-ish, like Tesla Model XE, like people not only pay more, but they're more excited about things. They strive to do better things. And I haven't really seen that when things become regulated. Like we have these projects that they're just like kind of fiddling with the software and the numbers to just figure out what is the minimum amount of like things they can do the old way so that they can still check that box and meet the code. But they don't really like take a step back and ask, you know, with the pandemic, we have spent so much more money on the code minimum. Like, can we do anything different? Can we do anything nicer? And you know, maybe like more carrots introduced there would have been like resolved that. But, yeah.
Yeah, I'm on the carrot side as well. I think regulations stakes are good, but BC has already a lot, not just in buildings, but transportation and so forth, and resources, forestry, and you name it. We're not laggers in the world. We are the leaders, and some of the great leaders, especially like the code, for example, building code. But we are lagging market-based incentives. Not taxpayers-based incentives, which I think, it's good to get incentives from anybody, but if I can choose, I think it's market should pay for those incentives. So that's why, to me, carbon markets is a great incentive for moving people towards a race to bottom. Regulation is going to try to push that bar down slowly over time, and as fast as we can. For sure, that's necessary. But if we can accelerate that curve down by giving people money, I would like to see the city of Vancouver in 5 years have, create an account for everybody on the city, a carbon account. If you do better than the average in the city, you get paid for it. Wouldn't it be, a lot of people would be like, yay, I'm going to be cheering for a higher carbon pricing. Instead of like, if you take transit, if you bike, if you do something that's better for the environment, you should be rewarded. The policymakers can't take a stand on that. There's precedent like the city of Tokyo, where they created a carbon market within the city, just for the city itself. Why not Vancouver? We're going to be the greenest city. Let's do that. And then obviously people is going to be comparing and benchmarking against each other. You're going to be on your phones and looking at, oh, my number is like this year was 12 tons. I'm 4 tons below the average. That's awesome, right? Why not?
Every civil servant loves to hear we can incentivize without using government money. That's always an enticing proposition. We're almost at time here, and I'm going to beg the forgiveness of the organizing team and just invite, if we have one audience question.
I think there's that one.
Yeah, want to come up?
Thanks. My question is, does Vancouver matter? Is anyone paying attention? And can we have a positive impact on the global system? Thanks.
Let's go, David, and go across.
The question is,
Does Vancouver matter?
does Vancouver matter?
Are people paying attention?
The answer is absolutely yes. I talked to many governments around the world, and 10 years ago, BC was the leader, like I said, in the carbon markets discussion. A lot of people pay attention to what Vancouver does or doesn't do, which it's an opportunity, but it's a big challenge because we're not doing enough in many areas, and we're leading, like, for example, in the carbon markets topic, we're talking about Switzerland, Germany. They're taking the lead by far. Even the Middle Eastern countries taking the lead on this. The Middle East, Saudi Arabia. Why not us? Why not Vancouver? So yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah, when you look at the bell curve of adoption, the 2.5% at the beginning is the biggest thing. Who here paid for parking with their phone? Okay, the asker of the question is, so pay by phone is an interesting example. In the city of Vancouver gave opportunity to this small thing that had this crazy idea of using phones to pay for parking. And they just they got a head start inside this region, inside Vancouver, to experiment and work on things and develop something. And then when the rest of the world woke up to the fact that the smartphones are a thing and people want this, it got exported to everywhere, and eventually like Volkswagen got it, in Germany. So it's like, absolutely. Like if we see the stuff, like if in 2021 we see a stuff that other people will see in 2024, well, guess what? We will have senior organizations, very, very high level of talent and execution for the rest of the world, and we just can export these technologies and maybe accelerate the whole global change, for sure.
I think, yeah, Vancouver does matter in that they've actually influenced not only the BC Energy Step Code, but also some of the federal work at the code level as an example. So what they do in Champion First gets looked at by other jurisdictions across Canada. It also puts them in a club with other leaders around the world, like New York or the state of California, and gets them into conversations that allow for even bigger moves together. So those are sort of key things that have opened up wider doors for action here in the city.
I mean, I'm not just going to disagree and say that Vancouver has done great things, because it has, and I totally acknowledge that, and the other panelists have laid that out. I think in terms of the work that I do, in terms of our people paying attention to Vancouver, in terms of climate justice, Vancouver's just not cutting it. It's not where it needs to be, not where it should be, given that it has been a leader in sustainability and climate change, and we are not responding. We're not thinking about climate change from an equity perspective enough. People are not looking at us to see how we're doing that. We are looking elsewhere to see how that's being done. And I think that is becoming a bigger part of the conversation, is how we respond equitably to these challenges. And that's where I think we need to remember our position as a place where people are looking at and do better and respond to those challenges and work with the people that we actually have the ability to connect with in a way that other cities, Burnaby, New West, Surrey, might not have that platform to connect with those other cities. And we should really be leveraging that, but also doing more so that we can influence locally and globally. So I'd like to see Vancouver kind of come back and take charge a bit in some of these spaces.
Love that call to action, and I'll just put a quick plug in. We take that claim very seriously. I believe that is a very correct assessment, and the VEC just produced a report, which we're very proud of, on the just transition, and asking questions about what kind of leadership role Vancouver as a city, VEC as an agency, and many, many other organizations, unions, community groups, individual businesses, industry associations can play in that world. So I love that as a call to action. I think that's very important. I'm begging our organizers, can we do one? I see we've got one more audience question. We can do a lightning round of answers. Okay, real quick, please. Thank you.
So I'm in sales, right? And I work with a web development company. And so obviously I'm looking at various ways that I can try and communicate with people to kind of reduce the amount of email output and also increase the speed of their websites and stuff so that they're not clunky and stuff, right? It's hard enough to get employers to understand why that energy usage is important. But here's my question. You got 7 men and 14 women in this audience, okay? That's it. Your problem is male engagement. The women are going to be highly affected. I know that because at 56, I still don't own property. I'm living in my house with my 86-year-old mother, and I got about $150,000 of changes I got to do to that house on a big giant lot in a part of Coquitlam where the seniors don't want any changes. They got 120 by 100-foot lots. They don't want any change. And guess where they are? They went down to California because the weather's changed. Your problem is male engagement. You've got to make it sexy to the guys. You've got to involve them in the process of mentoring these young people. You're talking about all these different types of industries. You've got technology, you've got designers, you've got architects, engineers, all sorts of construction. The pay in construction is crap. You've got high pay in the film industry and nobody needs any more movies. We don't. It's ridiculous the rate of pay that a truck driver can make in that area.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm not hearing the question here.
Oh, no. Okay, but no, so here's the thing. The engagement that I'm talking about, and it's a positive one, is changing that, shifting that so that you can see better pay in those areas and mentorship by those older people, the retired folks who left town.
Again, I'm sorry, I'm not hearing the question here.
Okay, so the question is, are we involving, whether it's government or local businesses, in that way? Are we advertising and engaging with them in that way?
In which way, I'm sorry?
In a way that basically says, you come into this and take some ownership into it. That's the basic principle of business or sales or anything. You take ownership of a problem, right? And you're answering, you're giving solutions to people. But when the bulk of the people who are going to be affected are females or low income, not the males. Sorry, you guys are earning a hell of a lot more than I have over my entire lifetime. Then, when you ask the question about, who paid for parking, I took the train into town from Coquitlam. Yeah, I got a car, I'm not going to spend the money on that. So what I'm suggesting and asking, are there any initiatives approaching the film industry, approaching the advertising industry, approaching the construction industry and saying to them, how do we get together on this and involve the community?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And sorry to cut you off, we're at the end here. There's a lot in that. I think maybe the question is, let's speak to the last one. Just maybe one initiative from each of you where you see that sort of multi-sector, multi-stakeholder engagement, and where you see, I'm hearing an element of justice or of social justice maybe at play. One initiative that you think speaks to that bringing together of parties.
Well, being board director at BCSCA, I do encourage everyone to look at all of the volunteer stuff that we are doing. It's definitely, you know, there is a lot of engaging everyone. Like it's building a big tent and hearing out from everyone. And I think a lot of times I've seen what people say and what people like really mean might be different. Like they say they don't want something, but in reality, if you dig down, it's just like they want to have their life in a very certain way and they want to be secure. So I think there are a lot of.
So BCSEA's got one.
BCSEA, yeah.
David, what's a?
I would suggest the idea that I threw before with the city of Vancouver, that, you know, create a carbon account for everybody, quantify the impact that we all have. Yeah. So I know what my impact is, what your impact is, and incentivize people that has the lowest impact. People with big lots and big houses probably not going to get incentives.
Yeah. Cool.
We're working on rapid upskilling of marginalized workers into low carbon jobs. So this is training people who wouldn't otherwise get access to good quality jobs that with low carbon skills to position them for the future.
Here at SFU, we've got the Center for Dialogue that works with different partners and municipalities to actually engage with a very diverse set of stakeholders and residents on big issues. The Center of Dialogue worked with the City of Burnaby on housing and homelessness and produced 7 reports that went to actually create Burnaby's new housing strategy. They're doing that again with resilience with the City of Burnaby. I think looking for partners like a university to actually help you do that engagement work, and we're seeing amazing results of what that looks like on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, Canada's most community-engaged university, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I'll again mention SFU's, VEC's work on the Just Transition, multi-stakeholder advisory group, trying to bring that out more and more into the community. I take your point. You know, there's a lot of voices that are not in this room or not in these conversations, and we need to be doing more to bring that in. So appreciate that. We're over time, and I'm going to close us off here by first of all, by thanking you and thanking our panelists. We have some lovely gifts for them, which I'm going to give to them off screen here as we move forward. Please stay engaged with us. We at the VEC want to be, like SFU, a platform for dialogue, a place to engage, and a place of valuable information to you. We have lots of it on our website here. You can see the ETL information that we have. We also have a wonderful newsletter, which I recommend that you check out. But overall, I just want to thank all the organizers at SFU here, the VEC team, all of our panelists. Let's please give them a round of applause and stay in touch. We'd love to stay with you. Thank you so much.